Hey guys! So I finally got to talking about Clockwork Angel, which is the fourth book in the series if we're going by chronological order, or the first book in the Infernal Devices series, or as I like to call it, the Clockworks series. And Clockwork Angel is great. There are a couple of things that I don't like about it, but overall it's a very solid story. And what makes it so great and probably so popular is that it's entertaining and engaging, which is something that a lot of authors should learn from. It is incredibly fast paced. The story just grips your attention and refuses to let go. Almost every single chapter ends on a cliffhanger. The characters are compelling. You really feel for them, well, at least for most of them. The main premise of the book is about Shadowhunters who act is a police of the supernatural world, or as Magnus Bane put it, the monster police. Their main mandate is to protect humans and to protect themselves against supernatural threats. And so throughout this novel, similarly to a lot of other novels in the series, you have a bunch of characters who try to deal and stop a certain supernatural threat from happening. The story takes place in Victorian England in 1878, and Cassandra Clare does a pretty good job of capturing the historical context well. At least she captures the main vibes of it well. There is a great amount of attention given to purity and proper behavior and sexual restraint, which, whenever we think about Victorian England, is the first thing that comes to mind. There is also a topic of poverty that gets touched upon. Even though the majority of characters that we follow are wealthy, there are references being made to the servant Sophie and to Tessa in terms of what would have happened to them had the Shadowhunters not taken them in the Institute. So the book makes it obvious that there is this huge underclass of people that have it very tough in society during that time period, which, as we know historically, has been very much the case. And then, obviously, Cassandra nails the aesthetics, the dresses, the corsets, the carriages, even the type of literature that the characters were reading feels like something that the characters would have been reading during that time period. The only thing that doesn't really match up is the writing style. The writing style just feels way too modern, which I feel like is a necessary sacrifice that had to be made, because if Cassandra were to write this novel more in Victorian English, that would have made the novel less engaging and less entertaining, because it would have slowed down the plot. And then there are the fantasy elements, or I guess a better way of putting it, fantasy creatures. There are obviously the Shadowhunters, who are half humans, half angels, and their main magic system is that they draw runes on themselves or on other objects, and these runes allow for them to have special abilities, such as to heal quickly, to be super strong, to be able to see or hear into places that they otherwise would not be able to hear into. And only Shadowhunters can bear runes or have runes drawn on them. If somebody who is not a Shadowhunter has a rune drawn on them, they are gonna die. And Shadowhunters have their own culture, which is really similar to that of humans or mundanes, as the Shadowhunters would call them. But it also has some differences. So the Shadowhunters, they're extremely elitist, and they look down on humans or mundanes, even though they have been sworn to protect them, as Tessa had rightfully pointed out. And they also look down on downworlders. They really do not like them, but they can't really hurt them anymore because they signed their accords. When I say that the Shadowhunters are elitist, I mean that they're elitist as a group, but the specific cast of characters that we're introduced to, they are mostly not like that, which does create an interesting dynamic and a bit of a conflict between our main cast of characters and the rest of the Shadowhunter society that they need to figure out a way to fit into, or how to change that society, or how to operate within it. The Shadowhunters are ruled by the Enclave, which is like a subset of their government, and then you have the Clave, which is the main branch of the government. And then there is also the Institute, which is a place where Shadowhunters live who have nowhere else to go, and within this specific book, it is mostly orphans who live there. And then there are also the Downworlders, and the Downworlders are supernatural beings who are not Shadowhunters or demons or ghosts. So this is sort of like an umbrella term for all the other beings. The three most popular ones are werewolves, vampires, and warlocks. And you also have the Fae, but it's not as important to the story. So when it comes to vampires, they are pretty much what we would think of as vampires within other stories. They drink blood, they don't age, they don't like being in the sun, and they're pretty much like what you would think of vampires in most other stories. Werewolves also follow the canon of what a werewolf is pretty well. They're humans who can turn into wolves, and they heal really quickly, and they are in packs, and they follow their leaders. And then you have the warlocks. And the warlocks are quite unique to the Shadowhunter universe. Unlike the way that warlocks or witches are usually described in all the other stories as just being humans with special powers, in the Shadowhunter universe, warlocks are definitely not humans. They have physical deformities such as blue skin, horns, hoofs, green skin, cat eyes, all sorts of different physical abnormalities that definitely makes them different from humans as far as their biology goes. They also cannot reproduce, and they also do not age, unlike most other stories where witches either age normally as humans or they have to stop themselves from aging by earning it through developing a magical gift of some kind. And warlocks are also half humans, half demons, which brings us to the demons. And demons are described as being this really ugly, monstrous creatures. They're really not being given like any human qualities at all, and they're considered this negative but powerful spirits that Shadowhunters are actively fighting against because they're the main spirits that attack everything. They attack humans, they attack Shadowhunters, and they also attack the Downworlders. Overall, I liked the world building. It feels expansive enough, and it also just has this combination of being sort of fun and unique, but also in other aspects follows the canon of what we consider those creatures to be like in other literature. So moving on to writing style. And the best way that I can describe Cassandra's writing style in this book is it gets the job done. It doesn't include much when it comes to flowery language, or metaphors about the meaning of life, or literary devices, but the scenes are extremely easy to follow. You can imagine exactly what's going on at all times. It almost feels like you're watching a movie, which makes it so upsetting that there isn't a movie based on this book. There is foreshadowing, but it's done in a really subtle, classy way, meaning it doesn't really give much away in terms of what's going to happen. It just sort of hints at it, but you realize that it was hinting at it only after the fact. And it includes just enough detail for you to be able to vividly imagine everything, but not so much as to bog down the story, which is one of the things that makes this story so fast-paced, which in turn makes it so engaging and entertaining. The only little thing that I did not like about her writing style is her use of constant references to the Tale of Two Cities. It's a tad bit overdone. Like, I get it, you were influenced by that book. Loads of authors are influenced by loads of different books. Doesn't mean you need to reference it all the time. So now I'm gonna be talking about the characters, and from this point on, there are gonna be spoilers. So if you haven't read the book yet, then please do so first and then come back once you're done. So, with this disclaimer out of the way, moving on to characters. And our main character is Tessa. And surprisingly, she's not a Shadowhunter. Well, who is she, you might be thinking? And well, we don't know. That's one of the main mysteries of this novel, as well as the next two future novels, is trying to figure out who Tessa is. The main going theory in this novel is that she's a warlock, but she looks completely human, and warlocks are not supposed to look completely human in this universe. She is also a bit of a plain girl trope. Like, she's extremely plain looking, yet both Jem and Will are extremely attracted to her, which is the real magic that she possesses within this novel. That joke aside, her actual power that she has is being able to shapeshift, and she doesn't just has the ability to shapeshift, she also has the ability to absorb other people's memories and be able to understand what they remember after she had shapeshifted. And I kind of like Tessa's character. I love how assertive she is and how she continues being in control of her situation despite everything that happens to her. She just remains this really strong character. It would have been extremely easy to turn her into one of those sappy victim characters that you just feel sorry for. She lost her parents, her brother turns out to be a traitor, she's held captive by the Dark Sisters who force her to learn how to use her powers against her will, she's locked up in a single room for days at a time, but somehow she remains this really strong character who continues standing up for herself and continues taking an active role in her own destiny. And I also liked her use of powers. Like, I like how she was strong, but not in the classical sense of just wielding the sword type of strong. She uses her powers to infiltrate De Quincey's party, which then allows for the Shadowhunters to be able to attack De Quincey, and which ends up helping them rescue her brother. She does a lot of, similar things like that throughout the novel, but physically speaking, she is not really that strong. And I do like that use of her power and how she's more of that character who is strong, but not necessarily in the physical sense. And then we have Jem. And Jem is just extremely nice and kind and gentle and respectful. He is addicted to this demon drug called Yinfen, and it is a really tragic story because he did not become addicted by choice. The demon took Jem hostage and essentially forced him to take the drug against his will, and as a result, Jem's body is now addicted to the drug, and if he were to stop taking the drug, he would end up dying, but the drug still kills him, just slower. And it just feels really unfair how a character that is that kind and gentle and nice as Jem is forced into this situation where he has to take this drug regardless if he likes it or not. And then there's Will. And Will is a really fascinating character. He's really contradictory. Like, he's bad, he acts out, he does just really horrible things, but he also pretends to be bad on a lot of occasions. He pushes people away from himself, but he also seems to really care about people. He and Jem are prabatai, which basically means that they're like brothers. They are meant to serve each other and put each other's needs above their own. So he is capable of caring about somebody, at least about Jem, but at the same time he pretends like he's not. And then when it comes to Tessa, when he thought that Tessa was dying, it was obvious that he was genuinely concerned. But at the same time, right afterwards, when he knew that she was okay, he made just a horrible comment about proposing that they have this sort of casual relationship, which during those times was extremely scandalous and extremely offensive for him to offer that. There is a reason for the madness, but that reason for the madness is not revealed yet in this book. But this contradictory nature of Will makes him a really fascinating character because you're not sure what he's gonna do next, and Will's shenanigans serve this purpose of adding comedic relief. And then you have Jessamine, and Jessamine is the trad wife meme. She feels a bit two-dimensional, especially at the beginning of the book, and at the beginning of the book it's not clear why she wants to get away from the Shadowhunters, because within the Shadowhunter universe there are plenty of Shadowhunters who become trad wives, so it's a bit unclear as to why she needs to get away from that. But then you sort of realize that Jessamine does not just want to be a trad wife, she wants to be away from the violence. And the Shadowhunter way of life is pretty violent. Since they're the first ones to be fighting the demons, they're usually the first ones to be attacked by demons. And so even if she does become a trad wife, and she herself is not going to be fighting or wielding a sword, her kids probably will be, or she might still get attacked by them, or her husband might die, and so on and so forth. Jessamine is also not the best character. She's kind of mean, she's a bit manipulative, and towards the end of the book I do like her more. I find her a lot more interesting, but at the beginning she did felt a bit too two-dimensional for me. And then you have Charlotte, who is in charge of running the institute. Well, technically Henry is the one who is in charge of running the institute on paper, but in reality Charlotte is the one who runs the show. She is a bit too nice from time to time, but she does show her tough side when necessary. And then there's Henry, and Henry is one of the only characters out of the main set of characters that I did not like. He is the embodiment of the incompetent trope. No matter what task he needs to do, he manages to screw it up. And everybody still continues to trust him for some reason, despite him screwing up over and over and over again with his inventions. He just feels way too cartoony and one-dimensional, and just in general, I'm not the biggest fan of characters being competent and that being made fun of, which is sort of the case with Henry. He does end up growing on me in the future books, but for now, I just don't really like him. The other small problem that I had with the characters is that Charlotte and Henry just feel way too young. They seem to behave a lot older than their age, and there's also too few of an age gap between them and Jessamine and Will and the rest of the Shadowhunter gang. It just feels like at that age of them being like in their early 20s, they cannot be enough of an authority figure for Will and Jem and Jessamine. I wish they were older. The Shadowhunters have the servants, Sophie, Thomas, and Agatha. Sophie has this interesting tragic backstory with her face. Her face has this huge scar on it, and she got this scar from her previous employment when the son of her previous employer decided to slash her face with a knife because she refused to return his romantic advancements. And that's the only interesting point about Sophie so far. I wish we got to see more of Sophie, but we didn't. She, for the most part, is there, and she doesn't have enough of a purpose. When it comes to Thomas and Agatha, they get even less time than Sophie. They just sort of exist, which would not have been a problem. There are definitely loads of characters who just exist and it's fine. The problem is that they end up dying towards the end of the novel. And when they die, nobody really cares because we never got to know them in the first place. So we can't really empathize with them when that happens. We know that it's a big deal from the perspective of Shadowhunters, but we don't feel like it's a big deal because we never got to know them well. Magnus and Camille also make an appearance, and just like Cassandra's writing style, they get the job done. They work pretty well as side characters. I don't have too much to say about them, positive or negative. They did not play a significant enough role for me to really talk much about them. When it comes to point of view, it's too focused on Tessa. Most of the story just follows Tessa, and that would not have been a problem, except that the POV shifts. And when it does shift, it feels really unnatural and weird. It feels like Cassandra is making the POV shift because she wrote herself into a corner in a way where she needs to force it to shift. And this unnaturalness of the shifts in POV could have been easily avoided had she shifted the POV more throughout the story. The plot starts with the Shadowhunters, more specifically Will and Jem, investigating why people are being murdered, and they suspect those murders have a supernatural cause, but they're not exactly sure what that cause is. Their investigation leads them to rescuing Tessa, who is stuck with the Dark Sisters, and she joins them in the Shadowhunters Institute because she has nowhere else to go. And then they continue investigating what's or who's causing the murders, and they try to find and rescue Tessa's brother Nate. In the process, they discover that their enemy, who goes by the name the Magister, is building a clockwork army. The clockwork army is the army of machines or automatons that neither God nor the devil has made. And this is a very relatable fear that we all have these days. Only we have no Shadowhunters to protect us. The plot is really exciting. Some of my favorite moments were the scene when James and Tessa were running towards the Institute to get away from the Clockwork Army, and then James collapsing due to his addiction to Yinfen. There was so much tension in it, and it was incredibly thrilling to read it because they were almost at the edge of not making it into the Institute, and Tessa was at the mercy of either Jem waking up or somebody opening the door to the Institute, and there was the central question if they would make it or not, and it was just really well written, and just that imagery of that Clockwork Army going towards them was extremely harrowing. The plot twist at the end of the story about who is the Magister and Nate working for the Magister was surprising. I did not see it coming. Like, it made sense in retrospect, it was Mortmain, because there were clues, but at the same time it was still surprising due to how nervous Mortmain acted when he came to report that the Dark Sisters were performing a ritual. At that point, I knew something was up because he just showed up out of nowhere, but I thought someone else would be responsible, and Mortmain just worked for that somebody else. I did not suspect him to be the Magister. And Nate was also a huge surprise because of how nervous Nate was, how weak and fragile, and how genuinely frightened Nate seemed when De Quincey was draining his blood. The moment at the end of the novel where Tessa pretends to kill herself and Will rushes in towards her was just so incredibly touching because Will just genuinely cared for Tessa. He rushed in towards her, he was genuinely upset, and he was incredibly angry at Mortmain. That scene was just amazing because of that moment between Tessa and Will that they shared. It really showed that caring side of Will. And I also liked the use of Tessa's powers in that scene because she shapeshifted into a different woman who was bleeding, and as a result she could fake having killed herself with a knife. And this was just a really great use of her powers because before we saw that she could use her powers in those ways, so it was great to understand that it was within the rules. It wasn't just out of nowhere. And overall, I like how Cassandra uses the character's magic and the character's magical abilities. Like, there are clues throughout the novel and there are rules about how magic can be used and cannot be used, and characters adhere to those rules. There is also a beginning of a love triangle between Tessa, Jem, and Will, and I love how subtle the love triangle is. There aren't as many just overt hookup scenes. It's very much just Tessa touching Will, Tessa sharing a moment with Jem when they're talking about things. I believe there was only like 1 or 2 hookup scenes throughout the whole book. And I also love how close the 3 of them are together. Jem and Will are parabatai, which means that they are sworn to protect each other during battle, and they have this sort of like a brotherly bond between the 2 of them, which makes this love triangle even more interesting because Jem and Will still have to be friends with each other, and they still have to be really close with each other, regardless who of them ends up with Tessa. I'm obviously Team Jem, because he's just so much more nicer and gentle than Will. Will is a bit too much of a jerk, and I feel like Tessa deserves to be treated like the queen that she is, you know? The only moment that I did not really like that much, plot-wise, was when the Clockwork Angel, which is the necklace that Tessa was wearing, came to life to protect Tessa against the Clockwork Army inside the Institute. So while everyone else was away and Tessa stayed in the Institute together with Jessamine and the servants, the Clockwork Army broke into the Institute together with Mortmain. And that whole scene felt kind of awkward because Tessa was hesitating way too much to be running away, and that Clockwork Angel was just flapping around in the air, attacking a single clockwork soldier. This shouldn't have been enough of a distraction to stop the whole Clockwork Army, or Mortmain, or Nate from going after her and catching up with her. Like, it was enough to distract a single clockwork robot, which it did, but then Tessa just stayed there in the corner for way too long, trying to decide what to do for her to be able to reasonably get out. It felt like she escaped only due to plot armor, not due to the angel. Also, the title of the book is Clockwork Angel, and the Clockwork Angel was referenced over and over again. When that moment happened, with that Clockwork Angel just flopping around in the air, hacking at one single lonely clockwork robot, it felt a bit underwhelming. The Clockwork Angel does some amazing things in future books, so I give this point a bit of a pass, but if you're reading this book as a standalone and not as a trilogy, the Clockwork Angel point is gonna be a bit underwhelming. So overall, I really liked this book. I think it was great. I could not give it a 5 out of 5 stars just because there were a couple of things I did not like about it. So I decided to stick with a 4.5 out of 5 star rating. But overall, really great book. Really recommend it. And I hope to see you guys next time. Good luck. Stay safe. Goodbye.